Due to certain current events going on in the world, and as such being stuck inside for the past 2 weeks, I've had a lot more free time on my hands. Now, I could use that time to catch up on my schoolwork and my studies, but it's now easier more than ever to just ghost my teachers. Instead, I've been watching more movies, going for runs, and listening to a lot more music. And the latter is what we're going to be talking about today. During my long daily stints of sitting down and lying down, I've been finding myself opening Spotify more and more often, and as such I've been discovering loads of new artists and albums. And considering I've had plenty of time to chew up, digest and then shit out the new tunes I've been listening to, I think now's a better time than ever to properly refine my list of favourite albums, and do that I have already off screen. Despite spending so much more time listening to music, I've been listening to loads of new songs from new artists, so to properly find my favourite albums I had to go back and refresh my memory of them. So I popped some of them on when I was going for my runs and then sat down and listened to them again when I could properly clear my head, and as such I've been able to properly narrow down my list of my favourite albums. Although I still had to whittle it down to 3, not for any specific reason, just because I'm not very good at drawing and you don't want to see me try and attempt to draw them all. I also tried to include some variety so the albums themselves aren't too similar, but considering there's only 3, does it really matter? So without further ado, it's time to get my art degree. To begin, I started cutting sheets of paper in half. I don't have any canvas paper or anything fancy like that, so I just had to make do with whatever my printer likes to eat. I snipped it in two, purely so that my drawings wouldn't take so long. I'm also using colouring pencils from this lucky dip bag I found. I'm like a monkey with a chain gun when it comes to paints. It's just safer this way. What is Kanye's best album is a question a lot of people may ask. Some might say The College Dropout. Some might say Kids See Ghosts. Others might say Jesus is King. Well, they're all wrong, because the true greatest Ye-Boy album is My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Fuck you, Anthony Fantano.
I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this.
My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, or MDUFT for short, is one of the best rap albums of all time, if not one of the best albums of all time. What makes it even better is that it's relatively easy to draw. There's no fiddly bits or intricate line work, it's just red. And there's like 100 versions of this album cover, so I could just take my pick of whichever one I liked the best. I went for the one with the crown, because even in an art video, there's still no escaping La Corona. So I got to work doing all the boring mathsy parts, like measuring the page, finding the center, creating the box, and oh look, I finished it! Now it's time to get creative. Or in other words, it's time for the hard part. Drawing the ground was a pretty good start, because it was just one line, but those eyes stared at me, taunting me, questioning if I had it in me to keep going. Fortunately, this was only my first drawing of the day, so I still had enough sanity to keep pushing on. I sketched up a quick outline of the head, and then went forth to the sword. There was something very satisfying about impaling the head of my doubter. It just felt rewarding. I'm sure I'd do Genghis Khan proud. I then got to work with detailing the face, which included those judgmental eyes, before I topped my man off with a sexy trim. Looking fresh, my guy. I still had one thing left to do before I ruined it with colours, and that was to finish off the background. Wispy clouds are hard, and also very annoying to draw, so that was a real blast to do.
It's always a good time.
Anyway, it was now time to draw in the outlines. Good artists would use some kind of felt tip pen for this. I used a black colouring pencil. Sorry guys, I'm not taking commissions right now.
Let's go to the beach, eat, let's go get a wave.
So after ruining any semblance of detail, we're finally on course to colour the damn thing in. I may, or may not have, also broken my red pencils really early into this. It was time to start thinking inside the box. In my attempts to blend yellow and gold together in the frame, I ended up turning it into a giraffe. After skinning Melvin, it was now time to give our dead king some life. Through colour, he's still dead obviously. Once that was completed, we go to the sword, the Kingslayer itself, and that was surprisingly easy to do. And because I was on such a roll, I went straight for the sky. That was also surprisingly easy to do, which clearly meant I went wrong, and looking back on it, I definitely did. However, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was done. I'm sure I made Kanye proud. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to impress him considering how his Jesus is King merch looks. But back to the album for some highly unprofessional thoughts. It's probably one of the best of all time, like I said before, and Runaway is also one of the best songs of all time. And that's all I have to say about it. I told you it was going to be quick. 2019, British singer, dancer and pirate FKA Twigs dropped this little masterpiece. Magdalene is an extremely close and personal experience with Twiggy herself. It details her time spent alone and isolated in hospital, and how this time spent away from her boyfriend Robert Pattinson eventually led to their breakup. It's a great album, and I feel a pang of guilt knowing I won't be able to meet justice with whatever monstrosity I draw, but oh well, here it goes anyway. I begin with a rough outline of Twigs, who I managed to turn to Bart Simpson. Yeah, it wasn't the best of starts, and after botching her hairline, I realised it wasn't going to get any better. I then made her look more reptilian than the snake on her shoulder, but hopefully with a bit of colour it'll look a lot more human. The lips look bad, however, and there was nothing I could do to save them other than retry it over and over again. After many more tries, I'd say I'd fixed it, but I hadn't. I just made it look somewhat less goofy. I then finished off the sketch by adding in the detaily bits around her face. This is only going to look worse once I go over it in the outline. What'd I tell ya? Anyway, it's time to colour it in. My problem is, I don't have any colours to match it. It wasn't exactly coming together nicely. Filling in Magdalene made me realise how much I took the red flat colours of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy for granted. Eventually I did complete her face, and all I can say is, I'm sorry. At least the background will be easier. And it was, because I went for just one standard colour. Silver. It saved a lot of time and hassle, and the drawing was already done for, so what difference was it going to make? It's not like making it any more intricate would have helped at all. And now for a bit of album chitter chatter. I'd highly recommend this, as especially most songs hit some kind of emotional chord within you. It's a really interesting experience. So at this point, I was beginning to realise the limitations of my drawing ability, which, not to brag or anything, but are pretty non-existent in the first place. I felt confident after finishing Kanye's album, but after this Frankenstein's monster of a mess came along, I was beginning to lose faith in myself. People are hard to draw, and it doesn't help that most of my favourite albums include the artist's lovely face in them. And considering how Magdalene turned out, I can only imagine how offensive Igor would have looked. The original script was supposed to be 5 drawings, but I retroactively changed it to 3 after Mr. struggling my way through the first 2. But I think it's time to just finish this off, get over and done with, and finish the 3rd album. I really love this album. I love how the songs start off slow and stripped back, and progressively build up more and more layers until it comes to a big crashing finish at the end. It's really great. Nullifer is a Turkish-English singer that was born in London, like me. And interestingly enough, she turned down the opportunity to join a female version of One Direction led by Louis Tomlinson himself. And after listening to a lot of her, I don't really understand how her somber tone of voice would really fit into a girl band scenario. Anyway, onto the drawing. I did my usual mathsy stuff here that I learned doing 3 years of technical graphics in school, which I swiftly dropped as soon as I had the opportunity to. So part 2 of Donal Can't Draw Faces was coming along nicely. This episode, I explored how hard hair is to draw. Can you see why I decided on doing less drawings now? But alas, it was word time now. This should be easier. Not really. And the bottom was a very big squish as well, barely making it onto the actual paper. But in the spirit of this video, we make do what we have, and I went straight onto the outlining. The lettering went down without a fight, but the daunting task of the singer was still ahead of me. And after colouring in the Miss Universe text, I slide-eyed the drawings and eventually ignored them, instead going on to colour the whole page in. I'm only delaying the inevitable though. And eventually the inevitable came calling, but I kept stalling, and instead I started doing the bluing. And once I'd exhausted my blue supplies, it was time to eventually end this poor picture's suffering. Surprisingly, the first box didn't end up looking too bad. I mean, it still looked bad, but it wasn't awful to say the least, which I can't really say for the next one. And there we go, the drawing's been completed, with the page curled up in misery in the fetal position. I decided to put it out of its misery pretty quickly. Now that I leave that out to iron, it's time I reflect back on the time I spent doing this video. What was the Aesop fable I learned from doing this thing? Was it that I couldn't draw? No, it can't have been that, I knew that from the beginning. And this wasn't a journey about acceptance. It must have been something else. You can't rush art. These albums are my favourite for a reason. Meticulously crafted, well refined, and moreover, passion projects from people who really cared about their craft. Much thought went into the composition of the song, the lyrics being what tones you want to encompass, the feelings you want to provoke, and what you want people to think about in bed at 12 o'clock at night. Hell, even the album covers are art. Everything was chosen for a reason. There's some meaning behind the aesthetics of everything. So what have I done? A crude imitation of something stripped from its previous meaning? If everything exists for a reason, what's the point of this video? Have I made art? Certainly not. Am I a fan that wants to show off their favourite albums? Yeah, but I don't think I've done them any justice. Or have I realised that my old Minecraft painting video is starting to rack up the views again? Maybe.